I want to tell you how incredible it is to be here today. It was 14 years ago, I attended the first 21st annual Penwar Summit here in Portland as a freshman legislator from Washington on the Transportation Committee. I had taken the Amtrak Cascades to Portland and attended Bruce Agnew's Transportation Working Group. Remember Bruce? And there these were the first of many Penwar meetings that inspired me to found the Washington Rail Caucus 2 years later. And I know Representative Nathanson didn't want to embarrass me, but I had the sister bill to her bill in 2013, which I wasn't able to get passed in Washington to work with the Oregonians. And I guess like Rep. Leavitt said, I keep saying we got to do like Oregon does. So thank you both you ladies. Over the years, Penwar's Transportation Working Group has taught me almost everything I know about passenger rail, freight, and port issues. We've gone from just a few rail-related sessions and a tour on a single day to a multi-day rail summit drawing participation from across the Pacific Northwest. I am so thankful to still have the opportunity to address these issues with you at this time. And I'm truly amazed that we keep on doing this year after year. Something is really trying to happen. You're making that the case. So let's get on to our meeting here. And some of these reps I have not met yet, but I'm going to go through my list and saw your picture. You must be Senator David Brock Smith from Oregon, correct? Thank you. And I do know Representative Kevin Mannix, Oregon Legislature. And let's see, who do we have next here? Right, I think we may have met each other in other summits. Representative Denise Baum from Montana. And we've all met Representative Nancy Nathanson, my cohort for 10 years trying to work on passenger rail. And of course, the co-chair of the Rail Caucus, Representative Marie Leavitt, who I work with all the time in Olympia. So before we get further into this, Bruce. Oh, I forgot about that. I don't know if you heard that, Representative. Bruce just introduced you. Thank you very much for being here. Anybody else online? Did Rep. Reed make it? Not that we know of. Okay. Well, thanks again. In preparing for this particular session, we did ask a number of our rail advocates for some ideas for questions, and we got dozens. And barely with 4 different states to deal with here and maybe 10 minutes each per state before we go to the Q&A, we can't get very deep into anything. So Bruce and Tom and I tried to generalize these things as best we could and really leave it to the legislators to see where they could answer some of these questions that they've been hearing all day. And maybe we should send all these questions to the legislators also. I think they've heard from many of us in the past, so that's not a matter of nothing new to them, but now they're on the spot, aren't they? Everybody's saying, let's get some answers. So here we go. I'm going to start with Washington State, Representative Leavitt. And these are general questions, as I said, but the representatives are free to go where they can to answer these questions and provide us some inspiration about what might happen in 2026. A recent legislative bill has set performance goals of 88% on-time performance for the Amtrak Cascade service by 2035, as well as up to 16 round trips between Seattle and Portland and 5 round trips between Seattle and Vancouver, all with shorter travel times. Additional goals include enhanced first and last mile connections and emission reductions, which will be accelerated with the delivery of the new aero trains, which we've been hearing about. So, Representative, what is your take on the legislative session in Olympia coming up? And are there plans to add more resources next session for passenger rail, particularly as we've been hearing about these CIDs that are out there right now? You know, we're concerned about matching funds. We're looking at the reauthorization bill next year. What do you see the legislature doing in 2026, and how will the Rail Caucus provide leadership with that?
Thank you. Don, there we go. Well, thank you for having me, and it's great to talk all things rail. And I've got a son who's 13 and has loved all things trains since he was old enough to recognize what a train was and is and still asks for toy trains for birthday, Christmas, et cetera. He's getting older, so his choices are more expensive in terms of his interest of what he likes. But love rail. And I think House Bill 1837, and you heard from Jason earlier, and thank you to WASDOT for being great partners, is really an important piece of setting a foundation of where we want to go for Amtrak. And I hear a lot from residents in my district. We have a lot of tracks in the 28th and certainly across our state, how important the Cascade Corridor is and the east-west viability. And so we'll continue to move forward and push on that particular corridor. You asked about resources. So the bill and the goals and the foundation setting is very important, and very much a supporter and sponsored that bill. Resources, that's a different question. And Washington State, our primary source of revenue for the transportation budget is gas tax. Gas tax revenue has gone down as more folks are choosing to drive EVs, and we push for EVs because it's better for the environment in Washington State, as is rail, by the way. And when we're talking about the impacts of our communities and the environment, rail plays an important role in that in terms of reducing greenhouse emissions, even though diesel is a preference that you heard earlier in the panel. But because our revenue is primarily based on gas tax, our transportation budget revenues have gone down. And so moving forward in a short session, I wish Chair Phi were here. He would give a more robust answer. So I'm not going to try to beat Chair Phi, but I will say that I don't think that our transportation budget revenues going into the supplemental or short session is significantly reduced from last year, but it's certainly not going to increase. And so finding resources for projects related to rail likely to be difficult. And we know that the cost of the projects that are already committed from Move Ahead Washington, which is a Washington State initiative for many, many projects that WASDOT works quite a bit on, those costs and increase of costs for those projects have risen because of the costs of just to build anything and construct anything. And so there's a pledge and a commitment to get many of those projects done. And so any resources that are available are often going towards those projects. We've also been instructed from Chair Phi just to limit our aspirations in terms of what we ask for this upcoming session for transportation projects and dollars and resources. Because while we increased the gas tax in Washington State by 6 cents this past session, which is significant, but it wasn't catastrophic, by the way, in terms of an increase, a lot of that revenue is going towards the projects that we've committed to. So I don't know where we're going to be in terms of resources. Where will the rail caucus be is your final question. So how are we going to advocate as a rail caucus for more resources? We'll certainly ask for resources to continue the conversation of reducing rail, or reducing time in terms of late time. We're certainly going to ask for additional dollars to continue the planning for the Cascade Corridor, particularly east-west where we can. And continue to push to make progress and ensure that we're not rolling back or we don't stagnate. I don't think WASDOT is going to encourage us to do that. I think they're good partners now in this effort, but having a robust increase is probably unlikely. And that's the message I'm giving to other folks across who are here, whether it's Rail Can't Wait, or other groups who are asking for a massive infusion. I don't think this is the year to do that, but we'll certainly want to ensure that we're staying on track, if you will, with the goals that we set in 1837.
Thank you, Representative. And with all the rail advocates in the room and some of the things that were mentioned earlier, particularly about 1837, and thank you for your support in getting that legislation passed. I'm sure you can realize that there's going to be a lot of us in Olympia trying to make sure that what we're talking about today gets heard and is at least discussed down there. Even if there isn't money to do anything, a lot more discussion about passenger rail really has to take place in both Olympia and Salem. Moving on to Oregon, since that's our partner state here and the host of this event. Another pretty general question. Legislation was passed to accelerate by-state and bi-national planning for Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia with formal agreements. Another bill required updates from ODOT on track upgrades, capacity improvements with the goal to boost ridership. And the legislature also provided funding to maintain and enhance the Cascade service as well as from the Connect Oregon statewide program. There's actually going to be 3 Oregon questions, so there's more of you here. So what is your take on, whoever wants to answer this, on the legislative session in Salem, and are there plans to add more resources next session for passenger rail? Nancy or Representative Mannix?
I'll say something quickly and then I want to pass it to my colleagues. I think what I heard the last question to be is, are there plans to add resources for rail in the 2026 session? I don't have plans, and what I'd like to say is that Oregon, like every other state, is facing massive cuts, budget cuts to programs across the board, whether it's food or shelter or timber management or transportation. Every state is facing massive cuts from federal in federal resources. So in a year where I think the emphasis will be on preserving food security and housing and healthcare for people, I don't see rail rising above the need to support basic living essentials for people. So I'm not planning to see additional resources in 2026.
Thank you. Rep. Mannix?
I understand Representative Nathanson's position about that complexity and the grand scheme of things in terms of financing issues. The opportunity for us lies in a different direction, which is public-private partnerships, where we need to be revamping our thinking about the regulatory scheme as to railroads. For instance, I advocate for us having a railroad department. When we created the aviation department in Oregon, it made a big difference. We pulled it out of ODOT. We should also pull railroads out of ODOT so we have one entity that is focusing on rail. And when you do that, there's an opportunity for more dynamic thinking. Tie that in with rethinking our regulatory approach as to the development of towns along rail lines, taking advantage of the new federal legislation, which encourages opportunity zones related to rail. Let's talk to our private sector friends who want to build small industrial and commercial developments along with housing, which is a big deal for our governor, and say, why don't we have, say, for instance, along the current Portland and Western rail line that runs all the way from Beaverton to Tualatin and Wilsonville, where there is a rail system run by Metro, convert that to a public-private partnership for a commuter rail line that runs all the way down to Staten and then eventually, Salem and eventually Eugene. Why? Because we would want to bring in partners who in those towns along the way that want to see commuter rail, they could be developing those communities, and we'd be changing our regulatory thinking about those communities. That has to do with a rethinking, a very broad rethinking, which that also involves bringing in housing. What I'm getting at is take a look at the complexity and embrace it, but then turn to our private sector friends and say, how do we do something where the state is not pumping money in, but is backing away on the regulatory strangulation and creating a regulatory structure for railroads which says, we love you, we want to help you. How do we work with you? 33 short line railroads in Oregon. How about us respecting that? Then we have 2, Union Pacific and BNSF. How do we respect them and empower them to do what they can? I'm giving you a speech because I want you to be encouraged. There are some things we can do. It will not involve, cannot involve a lot of general fund spending, but it can involve backing away from the regulatory strangulation, which does exist, creating a new way and a new approach. Keep that in mind. And you might want to talk about Coos Bay and the Coos Bay Rail Line.
That's coming up.
So I'll leave that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Very insightful comments there. We got 2 more Oregon questions. Leave the senator a chance here. 3 Amtrak routes now connect in Portland, Cascades, Coast Starlight, Empire Builder at Union Station. The station is in dire need of restoration, and Penware's Accelerator is working with Portland BOT Prosper Portland, ODOT, Metro, Amtrak, WASDOT, and Union Pacific through our Build America Bureau funding to help identify ownership and financing strategies for station restoration. To our Portland area legislators, in the state, I guess, what are your priorities for Union Station? How do you see it as part of what we're talking about?
I'll grab this.
Okay.
I think we need to be rethinking the entire Union Station situation and think about another public-private partnership and pull all those, I'll say this, local entities that are also strangling that potential and say, guess what? The state can supersede this. We'll put together a partnership where we're bringing in the private sector. We want to see a dynamic rail station. It's a beautiful historic station. How do we build on that? And yes, over time, build up the commuter rail traffic that makes that important. But we have much more than that. We have a freight capability in the state that needs to be rebuilt. So for Union Station, how about rethinking that and saying for all those local entities, love them all, they all have their own jurisdictions, but this has turned into a jurisdictional circus. And we should eliminate that in the sense of bringing them in and listening to them, but not letting them control the process. Oh, I had my microphone turned. So you have one entity which is in charge, bringing everybody to the table. Think about that. There's no reason why that can't happen in the next couple of years.
I don't think I cut you off, but
I was just having fun.
That's okay. Another quick question. In Eugene, passenger and freight rail systems converge to create a key transportation hub for the region, Union Pacific, BNSF, Amtrak, Cascades, and Coast Starlight. The Coos Bay rail line is 134 miles freight line operated by the International Port of Coos Bay and an interchange with UP and Eugene. This is a gateway for regional exports, forest products, and intermodal containers. What kind of investments are needed to enhance the critical supply chain in Oregon? Senator?
$2.2 billion. For some of you that were here yesterday, we spoke about this a little bit. So the Pacific Coast Intermodal Port Project is an exciting opportunity on the west coast of the United States and North America to bring container shipping to rail with the intermodal hub in Eugene to where we can bring about 1.2 million containers a year in and out of Oregon. It'll create over 5,000 jobs. It is roughly 750 million for the dredging, 750 million for the terminal, and 750 million for the rail line to be upgraded. It is a fantastic project that really is spearheaded by former Representative Brian Clem, who grew up in Coos Bay, who has witnessed the generations of poverty that we've had there and continue to do so. But what it will do for the state and for our Canadian partners to have that on the West Coast here and be able to use that intermodal hub in Eugene, not only for freight going out all over North America, but coming in and having that direct access, because you're literally on the ocean at the Port of Coos Bay. So you don't have miles and miles of river to navigate, but you have a direct access to our Asian markets, including Taiwan. So it's pretty fantastic, and we're really excited about it.
Thank you. I'd noticed that Representative Reed from Washington State has just joined us. Hello.
Hi.
And you missed some of the questions we already asked of Washington, but before we give you a chance to say something, I'm going to move on to a very quick flash that came down from Bruce as he ran down here with this question for you, Representative Manwaring. And you represent the Pocatello area where Savage has put a new transload facility to take up ag products to Port of Tacoma. There seems to be a strong local support for restoring passenger rail service between Boise to Salt Lake, a fast-growing area. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to appear remotely and be with you all this afternoon. Savage is a pretty significant, probably the most significant logistic upgrade we've seen in Idaho in a long time. Really, we were able to containerize a lot of our Idaho ag ports coming out of southeastern Idaho, and it's significant to be able to directly get that up through UP to the Port of Tacoma, and we stopped shipping so much of that via truck down through Salt Lake. So we eliminated a lot of truck routes by being able to get this Savage intermodal facility up and running. So really what we've seen here in Pocatello, we've seen the ability to reduce those transportation costs with the trucking going in and out of Pocatello. We've been able to add some local jobs at the terminal here. We've been able to have what I would say is as a competitive edge in shipping, be able to keep our quality of ag products getting over to the Asian market in particular. And that obviously that can save us some time and getting those containers back also to fill back up. So really what this has done is shown us that we can have some statewide logistical synergies. And really the key here is multimodal, building up our multimodal ability, and then showing that it matters when you're building passenger rail to make sure you're doing that. The freight passenger coordination and that strategy really matters. And I think that's what that Savage opportunity has shown us in Pocatello.
Thank you. I really love the regional aspect of what we're talking about today. Let's go to Rep. Baum in Montana and ask you a question here. In Montana, it seems like you have good success at the local level for passenger rail and enthusiastic support from the members of Congress in Montana. The Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority has successfully secured membership from over 20 counties to add additional train service to the Empire Builder and bring back the service to southern Montana. There's also state legislative support, but some major challenges. What are they, and how are you going to bring them along?
Yes, thank you for the question. So some of the challenges, and it's been interesting, it kind of bounces off one of my questions that I asked earlier panel regarding state rail plans and the importance of that. We've had some pushback when I asked in our prior session last year during the interim about updating our state rail plan and getting pushback and being told that it was not necessary. I since have continued on. Our state has just started its process of updating its freight plan and seeing that our good neighbor to the east, North Dakota, has a combined state and freight rail plan. That absolutely makes sense. You're assessing some of the same things as far as population, use, congestion. So that's going to be something that I plan to tackle, write a letter and direct our DOT to look at doing a combined freight and state rail plan. It just absolutely makes sense. And then what I've really been inspired in hearing previous panels today and to my two representative colleagues from Washington and Oregon, the fact that they have legislative, just in their states, a rail caucus. And this is something that that Big Sky Passenger Rail has been talking about. We had a conference in September in Livingston. And we had, I believe some people from all aboard Washington, and we had folks from, thank you for coming, from North Dakota. And it was just so inspiring. Everyone's talking like, how do we do this? And the talk was, let your communities write the story of what you want passenger rail to look like. And it again is echoed here. So going back to Representative Nathanson and Leavitt's conversations regarding a rail caucus, why not expand that? And when we're talking about the restored route, which is going to go through 7 states, bring Montana aboard into your rail caucus. Can we make it a multi-state commission or whatever, but a multi-state discussion where we can learn from you what is working? And since we're all going to be connected on this long distance route, let's make it the best route and well connected that we can. And I guess that's my plan of attack for me, is to getting these other states on board. Thank you.
Well, that went over well. I know that there have been some federal programs around the interstate compacts would put together working groups that would do just that and bring these states together with legislative support. So that'd be nice to look at that. And since Rep. Reed, Julia Reed has joined us from Washington, and I want to get back to her and give her a chance. Your colleague, Representative Leavitt, has already spoken a little bit about some expectations next year in Olympia. And of course, you were the prime sponsor for 1837, which we have talked about several times here today. Can you tell us more about your vision for how, rail is, passenger rail in particular, is developing in Washington State, and why you have a passion for it, and how you see things going forward next year?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I apologize for being late. My fellow legislators on the panel will appreciate when you're a citizen legislator, you have two jobs, and sometimes one of them gets in the way of the other. So apologies for being late. I got held up in a work meeting. But it's great to be here with you all. And, I would just say, like, my vision for rail sounds very grandiose. I feel like I'm really privileged to be able to join in with Rep. Leavitt and Rep. Marcus and other reps and senators who've been working on the rail issue for a long time, and to be a part of our kind of statewide vision for a passenger rail network that really works for our state and really connects the kind of particularly the core Cascadia corridor between Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, British Columbia. And I hope my Canadian friends will forgive me for wearing my Mariners shirt on this call, but it is such an important thing for our state, not just to provide an additional transportation option for people that live there, but also as we think about the cost of maintaining and preserving our roadways across the state, and the opportunity to take cars and trucks off of the roadway and to reduce the wear and tear, and therefore the expense to the taxpayer on improving roads. I really think that passenger rail is often treated as this like niche thing that's sort of over here, and roads are really the main thing, and the main thing that transportation planners and budgets are concerned with. But I think they're very intertwined, and really applaud the other legislators who spoke before, who kind of spoke to that as well, about having kind of a shared vision for freight and passenger, and I think also a shared vision for rail and road. That these are all important parts of our network. And part of the goal of 1837 is to try to get all of the folks on the same page of understanding that it is complicated to get to a rail system, an Amtrak Cascade system that works as well as we want it to, and there are expenses involved, but let's understand what those are so we can tackle them more effectively. I think one of the, interesting paradoxes of passenger rail in Washington is, if you talk to the freight companies, they'll tell you that passenger rail is their priority, and that's how their dispatchers prioritize traffic. If you talk to the state transportation agency, they'll tell you that, we have a state rail plan around passenger rail, and that remains an important mode, and it's important for our climate goals and other goals. And yet the reliability of our passenger rail system has declined sharply over the last 10 years. So if everyone's prioritizing it, but we're not getting the outcomes that we need, then something is not working. And I want to work together with the legislature, with the DOT, with the freight rail companies to understand, how do we get that equation back on track? And how do we ensure that if we are truly like prioritizing these modes of transportation, and we are investing in them, putting a lot of state and federal money into them, how can we ensure that those investments are actually yielding positive changes, and not just kind of accept a status quo where rail service just gets a little bit worse every year. So
Thank you, Representative, and
yeah.
congratulations again on your sponsorship of 1837. You certainly had a lot more luck in your freshman year in the Transportation Committee than I had. So, I do have a couple more questions, but I want to ask Tom, where are we at in terms of going to Q&A? Or keep going? Okay. Anyway, so back to Rep. Manwaring, led by the city of Boise, and VRT, there was a core group of supporters for the Boise Salt Lake segment of the Old Pioneer Route, which includes local elected leaders, business and tourism leaders, and congressional members. The corridor is experiencing major population growth, huge economic growth, and the Salt Lake City Olympics in 2034. State legislators have been challenged to deal with this. What's the strategy to highlight the multimodal opportunities to connect airports, universities, intercity bus, regional transit along this 340-mile corridor?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, but it really just starts with, we have a lot of opportunity in Idaho. We are obviously a growing state. We have a lot of folks moving in along this corridor. We're building a lot of homes, a lot of businesses relocating along this corridor, also between Salt Lake through Pocatello, all the way across to Boise. What we're trying to do is nothing probably new that hasn't been discussed in these last few days, but we are trying to get an updated state rail plan ourselves in Idaho, trying to build that momentum with our ITD. We're trying to get support out of the governor's office and start to get more legislative buy-in. We've had discussions on whether a rail caucus would work well in Idaho, or how we continue to build that momentum. But I think we're trying to hone in on those places where we think we can make progress. And I think that is, again, highlighting those multimodal opportunities, highlighting the rural connectivity. We still have a lot of rural areas in Idaho that we need to connect. And then just frankly, hopefully we can again be part of this the corridor ID program and build momentum there, and figure out specifically, I think, building momentum by looking at and getting people excited about the opportunities, starting with restoring some of our facilities along the route, and getting local communities excited about the local economic opportunities that might be created with opportunity zones. And so that's kind of a big answer, but there's just a lot of opportunity around this. And I think things like the Olympics and partnering with Utah allows us to talk about it more often, and maybe take this as a window of opportunity to really have an ability to build out a route and get it restored.
Thank you for those comments, and also the initiative to work on that particular corridor. Tomorrow there will be discussion on the Pioneer here in Oregon, and certainly, as you mentioned, if we get a CID going as we did before for the old Pioneer route, it needs a new name though, but I think that that'd be something that we all really should be working on. I did have another question for Montana, Representative Baum. One of the great Back to the Future ideas in the Intermountain region of Montana, Idaho, and Alberta and BC is to enhance intercity passenger rail access to the 8 national parks in the 4 jurisdictions. This was highlighted by National Park Service leaders from Yellowstone and Teddy Roosevelt National Parks at the Big Sky Passenger Rail Conference in Livingston back in September. Your thoughts?
I think it would absolutely be fabulous. The presentation they gave in some of the photos when they showed Livingston used to have a Union Pacific rail yard. It's still there. The depot's in wonderful shape. It's just absolutely beautiful. And the fact that they had a short line going to the park to Cinnabar, sorry. And just the amount of traffic and to be able to move a larger number of people to a location versus adding additional cars. When you talk about the beauty of the park, and I can't remember the particular park, I think it was in Alaska, was the park ranger that gave the presentation. And he was talking about a park in Alaska where, you use bus service or whatever to see it. And to be able to have that, to get people down there in mass and then use the park transport or shuttles to see it, so it's less crowded. You're actually be able to take in more of the beauty and relax and not have to worry about driving and, God forbid, running into a buffalo or something like that. And they also talked about they have a very good success with autonomous vehicles in Yellowstone currently, which I thought was fabulous. That was a whole different conversation, but I think that would absolutely be beautiful. The Empire Builder currently runs to Glacier National Park. It is one of the top 6 ridership routes on Amtrak. And if I'm incorrect on that, I'm sure we have, I think Steve here that would correct me. But just the ease of seeing our natural beauties. And I would love to be able to bring that back and also include Yellowstone back in to that national park. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that people are itching to get to the Q&A, and the scripted questions have been used. And after the Q&A is done, you'll all get a chance for final comments. So we'll get to that. I want to say it's just wonderful to hear the excitement in your voices. You know, you don't see this at an engineering conference. So I really appreciate it. And that's important for us, because it's like you were saying, we really have, the community has to tell their story. And we are part of representing those communities and asking for the things that we need. Can we go to Q&A? Do somebody, so should we just pass it around? Is there any from online that I need to look at down here, Tom? Or Hannah? Not yet. There is a mic going around, and I know there's some people who've got some good thoughts out there. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Matt Kraybacher. I'm with the Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates. I live in Baker City, Oregon. So this is actually a question for the Idaho and Oregon legislators. I'm an advocate for the Pioneer Route, or really any east-west service between Portland and Salt Lake City. Thank you. I am wondering what can happen to work to ensure that if a CID grant is granted for a Boise to Salt Lake City leg of passenger rail, what can Oregon do to work with Idaho to ensure that that service goes all the way from Boise onto Portland, which would increase ridership just between Boise and Portland, and obviously, and between Boise and Salt Lake City. This would be a net benefit. It would be systemically positive to the entire northwest corridor that was talked about in the previous panel.
Thank you. We'll let Oregon take a response first, and then Representative Manweller.
Well, before we do that, we have an Amtrak board member in our presence who is from Idaho, Elaine Clegg. And this is the first Amtrak board member from west of the Mississippi, other than there was one from California once, since Amtrak was formed in 1971. So she carries the entire weight of the Northwest and Intermountain region on her shoulder, on her broad shoulders.
Yay!
Well, thank you, Bruce. And I guess it's good that I used to play sports, although I don't know if my shoulders are as strong as they used to be. You know, great question, Matt. What I'm learning as an Amtrak board member is that long distance routes are really only as strong as the state-supported routes that run along them. And the long distance routes that have segments that are covered by state-supported routes both make more money and gain more passengers. And a couple of reasons for that. The state route can help with maintenance and the costs of, you know, the infrastructure that Amtrak has to bear by themselves otherwise. And having that creates more frequency along the line. So while it's not ideal that the first application on the old Pioneer is only Boise to Salt Lake, the good thing about it is it's the middle section. And once the middle section's there, it's going to be a lot easier to connect the ends than if it were an and then you had to extend it, or maybe a lot more pressure, if I will, to extend to both ends. So don't know that I have any better answer than that, except that we've got to start somewhere. And this is a place where there's interest. This is a place where the cities and the two states in that section have committed to trying to get this corridor ID over the finish line. And if we can get that one piece started, then I think it opens the door for all the others. Huh? Oh, so one of the things I've also been thinking is that if you look at the economics today versus the economics in the 60s, the Northwest, frankly, has probably, and I'd like to study this. This is, you know, top of head here, and I don't have a study showing this, but it's likely that the route that we're talking about actually has more economic activity with Las Vegas today than it does with Denver. And if that's true, is there some efficacy in studying a route from Portland to Las Vegas that connects to Denver in Salt Lake, certainly, and hopefully with some more frequencies with some state-supported routes? I used to ride from Denver to Boise every summer on the Portland Rose, which was a Union Pacific train. It was a beautiful train. We had a lot of fun. My grandparents still lived in Boise, and we lived in Denver, so we'd go visit them. There used to be a route from Las Vegas to Denver through Wyoming called the Desert Wind. Maybe we could someday have the Desert Rose.
Thank you, Elaine. So, Oregon, what's your response to this question about hooking up?
Well, one of the things we need to do is first I'll ask Representative Nathanson if she wanted to comment. She's the head of our rail caucus. Okay. The dynamics are that you need a variety of communities to come together for this. In terms of Amtrak related service, get the local communities invested in the idea of the passenger rail, but get the businesses communities invested in the idea of what kind of business investment can we do for freight. Because to me, the dynamic of rail is the freight basically pays for the underlying rail system. Passenger rail can be on top of that. It can be a partnership, but it's very hard to have a rail line that's purely passenger that's going to go anywhere without a heavy government subsidy. There can be some of those, but they're usually going to be tourist related. There is one in Florida that appears to be working well. So what I'm getting at is you get the local communities to all say, we want to have this connection for passenger rail connecting up, but we also have to talk to the business communities. And we need to remember that these are lower population areas. And we almost, I used the wrong word here, but we almost treat some of our rural counties as colonies. We have 13 Oregon counties out of 36 who voted that they'd rather be part of Idaho. They're all in Eastern Oregon, they're all low population, and they all feel ignored. If you're reaching out to those communities, including Baker City, and saying, what can we do to help connect you for your passengers? What else can we do to help your rail connections be successful for freight? And that's where there is a dynamic. I get back to the partnership idea. And I think that's going to take some heavy duty conversations. Then we go to Amtrak and say, okay, you've got this center line. How do we expand it? Well, we need to expand it by having voters, people who want to see it happen, and companies, businesses who say, you know, this line can work more for us as a freight line too. And of course, we need to have the scheduling issues addressed because freight has to move. Sometimes it doesn't have to move on the same schedule as passenger rail. I'm not kidding myself about all the dynamics, but I do think we ought to start that conversation now about how we build it up, and then we take it to Amtrak with a package of support.
I'll just add real quick. It's one of the reasons why we're here, right? I mean, I am a huge supporter of Penwar and all the work that Penwar does. And these conversations are about the Pacific Northwest and Penwar region in the states. So as we have the agreements, the bi-state and binational agreements with Washington, Oregon, and BC, there's no reason, as you mentioned earlier, why we can't expand those out, especially when it comes to the freight opportunities, as was just mentioned, and the passenger rail service, to answer your question. Because having the opportunity to come from BC to Seattle to Portland to Boise to Salt Lake to Vegas, let's say, you have a fantastic opportunities to do that. And I have ridden the rail a few times myself. There are great opportunities, but that's what we're here today to do, and what Penwar is trying to accelerate with our region as a whole.
Thank you. And speaking for the rail advocates in this room, I know we understand the value of where freight, particularly as it relates to the supply chain, comes in, and that with these long distance routes with federal money ends up being a win-win because the corridor gets improved. So we do need to see a lot more from the industry folks and Class 1 railroads to say how they can help us, help them get the corridor improved with a lot less than it would cost them to have to do it on their own. And as you heard Representative Manwaring, the Amtrak board member, Elaine, said that it's all on the midsection now that you're working on. So what can you tell us about carrying the ball that far?
Yeah, well, I appreciate Elaine, and we're sure proud of her and the work she's done here in Idaho at Valley Regional Transit. And obviously, as a board member at Amtrak, we're really proud of that. And that's really helped our momentum. And I think will continue to help our momentum going forward. And I think this question's been answered. It really has been answered very well. I just maybe would make a couple of points, and that is, I think we do need to build this out as a focus on freight also, and do that at the local community level, as has been mentioned. I think we can look at those border communities in particular. I would start at Caldwell and Ontario and work out from there, and try to get some letters of support coming from county commissioners and other local officials that they want to see this build out. And then at the state legislative level, I think we can looking at resolutions, and maybe look at things that we could pass jointly and show support for each other, and do that publicly. We talk about it at these conferences, but sometimes I think we need to formalize that support, and it may help build that momentum. Even if we build out this middle part to build out that longer route and make it permanent, we're going to have to solidify some of that support with our broader colleagues in the legislatures.
Thank you. Matt, that gives you a lot of things to do, doesn't it? Thank you. Next question.
If I could
Tom?
stay on the topic of freight and specifically short lines, and tee up a session tomorrow, we're going to be talking about short lines, and actually have a really great panel of short lines here in the room talking about their needs, challenges they're facing today. What would you all say, each of the states, about coordinating on policy to support short lines, whether it's a tax incentive or understanding that short lines do operate across state lines in many cases, and they share similar challenges across state lines? What can we do to better coordinate?
Torkin. Oh, there we go. I'll take this one because it gives me an opportunity to say what I meant to say earlier as well. We had a bill introduced for three years now. When I say we, Representative Barkas, who's our ranking member on transportation that you heard from earlier, and myself, to provide tax incentives for short rail. And I'm a big advocate for doing that. It's been very difficult it has been very difficult, and now it's a non-starter, candidly, going into this upcoming session because of the resource challenges that we have, and the fact that when you provide tax incentives, and that's a shift, and it's a reduction to our budget. And so that's not going to happen this year. And I think the short rails folks in Washington have been disappointed by that. But I do think that policy is the right policy. It's just a matter of us getting through this budget hump to be able to move it forward. And I also think it's education. We're talking a lot about community education and working with community, but I also think that as a state and as a legislature, we need to talk about the importance of rail to one another, to be able to see the benefit of a tax incentive for short rail. There is an understanding or a perception by some that railroads and rail operators make a ton of money. Why would we give them a tax incentive? What do they need it for when there's so many needs across our state? And as a result, that ends up being the conversation near the end. It's not the conversation of how does this benefit the environment by expanding the tracks for short rail? How does this benefit freight? How does this benefit product and supply chain efforts? And that's where the conversation needs to rise versus how are we benefiting a very rich operator. And so that is a difficult challenge, but I think having a tax incentive and supporting tax incentives in Washington State would be a big boon in terms of providing more short rail options, and then also working with our Department of Transportation and with others in order to make that happen.
I'd like to add something to the conversation. Doesn't always have to be about money, direct cash or tax incentive support or grant. In the past, I have not hesitated to poke at the Class 1 rail lines or be a skeptic of the short lines. Are you really up to this? Can you really do that? In many of the circumstances when I've been pushing and prodding, I've been won over by their answers, their responses, and their actions. One thing I think we can do to help short lines is help them succeed. For us to have a healthy economy, we need healthy businesses. A short line railroad is a business. And to the extent that we can facilitate conversations, whether it's through chambers of commerce or regional workforce partnerships, wherever it is, we can find places to have the conversations. Sometimes it's about a regulatory burden. Sometimes it's about a relationship with an individual city, an individual planning department, an individual county, for example. If there are places where we can facilitate conversations to help the short line be a successful business, winning over new customers, for example, I think there might be a role for us to play in that and helping facilitate this. It's in a way hand in hand with the public-private partnership concept. How can we help you? Because to the extent that you are successful, we are successful, and our economy will thrive.
We can build on that, and I appreciate what Representative Nathanson said, and I agree with it. I'd like to use two examples. One is Oregon Health Sciences University, which we established as a public corporation in the 1990s, but we gave it the strengths of a state institution, but the strengths of a private sector institution, and they have combined those, and they are dynamically successful. Now, that model applies in the healthcare area. It doesn't necessarily apply in the transportation area. But we take a look at the Port of Coos Bay. The Coos Bay rail line is owned by the Port of Coos Bay, but who owns the Port of Coos Bay? The state of Oregon. There's only two ports in the state that are owned by the state of Oregon, and that's one of them. They have commissioners appointed by the governor. The state has never recognized its ownership interest in that port and that rail line. Why aren't we using RRIF funds, long-term loans at low interest, to redevelop that line? Because the thinking has always been insular. So we need to break away from the silo thinking, private sector, public sector, about partnerships. I'm back to that, where we say to the business community, is there something we can do to help you develop an industrial site, a commercial site, housing in an area where we are going to open that up because we have a rail line there that can serve you? Now, my view is we create an Oregon Railroad Department to do what we've done with aviation. We have an aviation department. People don't realize there are 96 small airports all over the state. 57 of them are state airports. And what did we do in this most recent session? We came up with $12 million, yes, general fund money, and we got about $100 million in FAA funding to improve those airports, leveraging our public sector dollars for, yeah, I'll say it, federal money, and other situations we could be leveraging some small amount of state money with our business communities. I'm going on too much about this, but I want to encourage everyone to think dynamically. Let's break out of those silos and say, the government doesn't have to be there to strangle me. Maybe the government can be there to help me.
Going to pass on that one. Okay. Well,
I try not to follow Kevin.
yeah, I was going to say, if anybody who's advocating in Salem and you got a slow day, go talk to Kevin and he'll get you wound up again. And I mean that with all respect and sincerity, Representative. Good job. Other questions on the floor, Tom?
Hello. Yes, my name is Bill Moyer and I direct Solutionary Rail. I've heard a rumor that at this moment, when we're facing the biggest rail merger in history. That when we've got the courts vacating Surface Transportation Board decisions, and the independence of the Surface Transportation Board being jeopardized, that Congress is considering not having a rail title in the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. And I think that I wonder how Penwar and you all feel about that and what we might do to make sure that that is not actually the case, because we need the Surface Transportation Board as a strong entity and continuing federal partnership to do the things that we are talking about. So do you have a reaction to what we can do about that?
Thank you, Bill. Do we have any congressional folks in the room or anyone in the state legislatures that might have a response to that? Nobody's aware of that? Well, as usual, Bill, you're finding out stuff before the rest of us. Anybody else want to try it? Rep Reed, I see you're smiling.
Oh, no, I was just smiling at Bill's prescience.
Yes.
I have no greater insight to give other than I think it's really important for legislators to be in close contact with their federal delegations on issues like this. And, it's a very chaotic time in the federal government, and a lot of things are happening or being rumored and then not happening. So we just have to stay in close contact is all I have to say. But I would love if there are more experienced folks in the room than me, like Rep Leavitt or others who want to chime in, feel free.
Right. So we do take your concerns seriously, Bill. Thank you for bringing that up, and we'll be on the watch for it. Bruce?
Well, and let me just respond. We heard earlier today from Karen Hedlund from the Surface Transportation Board. Penwar is not in a position to take, obviously a position on any mergers. That's the STB, but that's what we wanted to hear. In terms, Bill, your question about a rail title, one of our roles in Penwar is to coordinate the messaging to our very powerful congressional delegation. Elaine talked about that earlier this morning. We got the right people on the appropriations and authorization committees, both the House and the Senate. We have a Penwar team in DC next week that will be meeting with all of the important members in the congressional delegation, and we will be pressing rail support, CRISI, federal state partnership, highway rail grade separation, infra, mega, all the words you've been hearing about the last few days, all these discretionary grants that the Northwest competes for very well. If you add up the numbers in the Northwest states, we have done over our, boxed over our weight by bringing on these extra dollars, the Salmon Bay Bridge Project, Palouse Coulee City Short Line Railroad, et cetera, et cetera. So we are very strong on discretionary grants, in addition to the traditional federal formula funds that goes to the DOT to support our highway infrastructure and our bridge infrastructure, which we also support. But having discretionary grant programs for what we call high performance rail, grade separations, freight improvements, passenger rail enhancements is part of our mission.
Thank you, Bruce. There's time for one more question before we go to final remarks. Anybody? Remembering that we saw dozens of your questions, and I'm sorry we couldn't get into all of them. Some of you know that there will be a Rail Advocate Network meeting, a sidebar tomorrow afternoon, where we're going to sort of debrief on a lot of things we heard today, as well as the Big Sky update tomorrow morning. So we can certainly get into some of those questions there and see how we can work together with the legislators. Tom? No more questions? Oh, I know there's some inquisitive people out there. You've been sending me emails for weeks. Okay, that's fine. I think Rep Leavitt has to leave first, so I'm going to have you do your final remarks. And since we have barely 10 minutes for 7 of you, a minute and a half would be fine.
I'll be quick. My daughter has a orchestra concert in Tacoma, Washington, so I need to hurry if I'm going to make it on time. I couldn't agree more on public-private partnerships. I think that's really important. And using all aspects of community. It's been really interesting in Washington to have the environmental groups join us on rail caucus issues. and have brought a different element and perspective of the importance of rail that has really been able to leverage that interest to support from different communities who might not be in support of rail or think about rail in that way. And so continue on with your voices. I also think that if you have, we talked about regulation a little bit. Some of that is federal, and there's not much we can do at a state legislative body to address regulations that are federal. But where there are opportunities in the state through WASDOT or ODOT or MDOT or whatever you call it yourselves in the other states, where there's opportunity for us to do things better, we certainly want to hear those and would welcome those conversations as we go into our respective legislative sessions. And I'm going to walk off the stage. Don't mean to be rude, but I don't want to miss our concert. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
About a minute and a half, you said, right? I will try to summarize 4 points I want to make, leave you with things. These aren't all of my rail priorities, but I want to give you a flavor of what's important to me and what I hope is important to you as well. First of all, what role does new technology play? When I think about AI, when I think about the opportunities for remote inspections and sensing, how can we use new technology to ensure or improve safety and security of rail? And I mean literally of rail, of bridges, of crossings. I always have cybersecurity on my mind. I'm also very keen on making sure that we are keeping secure our bridges and our rail infrastructure. So to what extent can we use new technology to support and improve that and do better with less investment? Second, thinking about freight. What are we good at as a region? I know in Oregon, I'm always thinking about, gee, if we're going to put emphasis on maybe we're going to be manufacturing more drones, more batteries, what are we doing with biotech? Of course, we've got the agricultural commodities. What about the inputs, the parts that are coming into manufacturing and then the exports? Are we really making use of all of our conversations we have for the business community to talk with the legislature and then with the rail lines to try to move more by rail? I don't think we do. Frankly, I don't think we do. We need to do more of that. Third, we should be using our rail right-of-way. It's not ours, of course, it's privately owned, but we should be encouraging rail right-of-way to be used for multiple purposes. It's there, it's a very cost-efficient way to do power, to do telecom, whether it's broadband or something else. Let's talk about making the best and the optimal use of the right-of-way that we have. And finally, with passenger rail, some of you have heard me say this before many times: more, better, faster. The way we justify increased investments in rail is to get more people to ride. The way we get more people to ride is to make sure our investments are smart. We need to have more options per day, and we need to improve on-time performance. You do that, and more people will start riding.
Thank you.
I guess my closing comments will be just a short narrative on when I first became part of the state legislature in 2023. I had met up with Dave Strohmeyer from Big Sky Passenger Rail in 2022. I have always been an absolute passenger rail fan. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we used to take the Amtrak to Chicago to go to the Science Museum when I was in Girl Scouts. Fabulous. Full circle, I think, so I look at my journey in getting involved with Penwar as kind of like being part of this big box of a jigsaw puzzle. And I'm so impressed and so thankful for Penwar and their efforts to get all these different entities together. And every time I go to a conference, make new connections, learn more information, that puzzle keeps getting more connected and the plan going forward gets more clear. And I truly am inspired regarding the individual states that have rail caucuses. Again, I want to look at, extending that to us and have the other states along the long distance line and what have you, be connected and growing the community. We are the messengers here. When I talk about having, what does your community want? What is it they want passenger rail to look like in their community? They have to be speaking to us. We are the messengers, and we need to be reaching out to them to make sure that we are getting that input so we have the support. So we can go back to our state legislatures and that myself, I can learn from the ones that have already gone down this path and how to make the rest of our legislative colleagues and our governor get on board and support it, because it supports the entire economy. And the more connected you are, you're going to have a greater economic impact. You're going to offer opportunities, and the list goes on. I'm trying to not like stand up and go woo woo, but I am super excited. Thank you. All right. And again, I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go on stage, I feel like people who are always remote kind of get forgotten. They're like having their name at the end of the alphabet in class. So I'm going to go over to Representative Manwaring first, and then Representative Reed for your final remarks.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and I, of course, appreciate Penwar. And it's always great to get everybody together and have these types of conversations. I usually learn more and take away more than I can possibly contribute. And I appreciate my legislative colleagues on the panel today. I think what I'd like to close with is just saying, maybe just piggybacking off what I just heard, connectivity is opportunity. And I think that's what we have to remember. The more ways we can connect each other, connect communities, and then connect states, we are creating opportunity. We have to make this about economics, make this a play for building economic opportunity, and that's how we get that state support. That's how you get tax incentives. If you need them, you have to show that you're going to get that return on investment. So connectivity and return on investment and partnerships are the path forward. And I think these relationships that we continue to build at meetings like this are the way we do that. So I just want to say thanks once again for the opportunity to be here and share some comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Reed.
Yeah, I'll just add, it's so great to be able to share this. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. And I especially want to thank all of the volunteers and grassroots advocates. I think that is really the secret to success in Washington, is not only are the legislators very connected and united in our focus on rail, but we are blessed to have a wonderful community of folks who come from all over the state, from towns and cities and rural and urban areas, who care about rail and take their time to develop policy ideas, to share with us, and to support those policy ideas all the way through the process. So I think that's a really important part, is your local rail volunteer and enthusiast community. And just shout out to Solutionary Rail and Rail Can't Wait and All Aboard Washington and all the folks who are part of our rail community in our state. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Representative.
All right, I'll go next. Woo, woo, I love that. I love that. Woo-hoo. Sometimes we need to take a step back and look at what we have. We have a tremendous resource in our states consisting of rail. That is an existing capital resource, the rights of way, the rail. What are we doing to enhance that capacity? And what are we doing to expand the capacity where appropriate? Keep thinking that way, because so many of our politicians, our legislators, take it for granted. Hey, it's there. It's going to take care of itself. No, it's not. We have to be supportive. And yeah, that's why I'll be pitching having an Oregon Railroad Department, and no, the railroad shouldn't have to pay for it. It should be something that we set up so that it's there to support the rail system. But please don't take our existing rail system for granted. We've lost enough rights of way. We've seen enough abandoned lines. How do we transform our thinking and say, this is a tool for economic transformation, not just transportation? Thank you.
Well, we're going to close right on time. Senator, you're the closer. Bring us into the station.
Thank you. And I just want to give a shout out to Representative Nathanson and Representative Mannix for their leadership on these issues. As you can see, they're really engaged. Of course, Representative Nathanson on the Rail Caucus and Pinwar. And for putting this together, everyone in this room is engaged on this topic because it is what really grows and keeps our economies going. And it's critically important that we engage in this Pinwar region to continue to make opportunities available to expand not only the passenger, but the freight that's critically important to our communities across the Pinwar region. That's what we're going to do in Coos Bay. With the Pacific Coast Intermodal Port Project. It's only going to accentuate the intermodal hub in Eugene and the opportunities across the country and the Pacific Northwest and North America and making it happen. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for Pinwar and the leadership and everyone involved with this conference and what we're doing.
Thank you, legislators.